It is my honor and a pleasure to be here today. And the topic I'm going to speak on is China's economic growth in the next decade. And I will post this PowerPoint on my webpage in a couple of days, so you feel free to download. One of the things that I want to point out is that China is today the second largest economy in the world, about 16% of world GDP. The US GDP is about 24% of world GDP. China is also the second largest trading nation. In 2019, had accounted for 10.7% of total world trade. The US accounted for 11.3% of total world trade. So, they are number one and number two. China is the fastest growing major economy in the world over the past 40 years, averaging around 9% per year. But Chinese per capita GDP is still very low. It is about 10,000, slightly above 10,000 US dollars. And this is actually only less than 1/6 of the US per capita GDP. I want to show you this on the economic fundamentals on China going forward. Well, what you see in the red line is the savings rate, the national savings rate, not the household savings rate, the national savings rate. And the blue line is the national investment rate. And you can see that they are both very high. They are around 40%. Okay, and savings is slightly higher than investment. And what this says is two things. One is that there will be lots of capital savings available for investment going forward. So we expect that capital is not a problem. Okay, capital is increasing. The other thing is that China is actually self-sufficient in terms of say demand for savings. So it's very different from the U.S. situation where investment will exceed national investment. So that's one part of the fundamental is that capital will be available. The other part has to do with labor, okay? And there are really 2 points to make here. One is that the agricultural sector, what you see in the chart is the green part, okay, is now less than 10%. I think it's a little bit above 7% of GDP. But the agricultural sector, if you see the next slide, actually still takes about 25% of the labor force of employment. Okay, what does that tell us? That tells us that there is still surplus labor that can be transferred from the agricultural sector to the industrial sector and to the service sector. So there is no shortage of labor supply, certainly in the foreseeable decade or two. But in addition, I want to also emphasize that the Chinese working age actually is defined as 16 to 60. This is an old definition that probably was adopted in the 50s, and now 60 is way too soon. And all China has to do is to lengthen the retirement age by 5 years, perhaps even 10 years, gradually. They would also provide another source of labor. So neither capital nor labor is a problem, is a constraint to further growth. I want to also show you that China has been growing really very fast. What you see in the graph, the blue line up there is the US GDP. The red line is the Chinese GDP. US GDP is still higher by about 1/3 the Chinese GDP. But the growth rate are the columns, the red columns and the blue columns. You can see that the growth rates have been much higher in China than in the US. Okay, even though the Chinese growth rate has been coming down, it is still around 6%. Now, the other thing to notice is that Chinese reliance on exports and imports have been coming down. The blue line is the share of Chinese exports to GDP. At the peak, it is almost 35%. I mean, it is it's very high. It's really come down now to just below 20%, which means that the dependence is actually not that high. the next chart is also interesting because it shows that Chinese dependence on inbound foreign direct investment has also been declining. Okay, and this is a percentage of foreign direct investment (FDI) as a ratio of gross domestic investment. You can see that it is now around 3 or 4%, whereas at one time it was actually quite high, as almost 15%. Okay, so the dependence on foreign imports, or dependence on foreign direct investment has declined. The other thing I want to point out, and that's really quite interesting, is that the Chinese economy is actually not very vulnerable to whatever happens in the rest of the world. It's not vulnerable to external disturbances. Now, what I have shown you is the quarterly rates of growth of exports of goods in selected Asian economies. You can see that Chinese exports fluctuate like everybody else. Okay, so you can see all the fluctuations: 1997, 2000, 2008, and so on. You can see all the ups and downs, just like everyone else. And imports is the same thing. Okay, you have huge fluctuations. But now we look at GDP. You can see the red line is to China. You can see the red line actually fluctuates, but it's relatively stable relative to all the other countries. Okay, so this shows that it is actually not very vulnerable to external disturbances. I might add that the United States is the same. The US economy is basically pretty well independent of whatever happens outside, all right, because it's large enough. It's the same thing. Now, you can see a big dip in 2020, first quarter, and that is because of the COVID. And the COVID actually is much more, it's just as much domestic as it is external, because it's what's happening to the supply and demand within your country as well as outside your country. Now, next, I want to turn my attention to what is called the twin circulations or dual circulations. This is a concept articulated by President Xi Jinping of China, sometime last year. But what he said is the following: China should promote the formation of a new pattern of economic development with the domestic circulation as the principal focus, with the domestic and international circulation mutually reinforcing one another. I want to emphasize that this dual circulation does not mean that China aims to be self-sufficient. It isn't. China tried it before, and self-sufficiency didn't work. We need to make a careful distinction between self-sufficiency and self-reliance. They are really two different things. And I think we can see in many cases that China continues to its economic reform and continue to open up its economy. Now, what I want to show you here is the Chinese exports and imports as a percentage of GDP. Okay, and you can see that at the peak, it's more than almost 2/3 of the economy is involved in what is called international circulation. But you can see that it's actually been coming down. And if you define international circulation as the total imports plus exports relative to total domestic demand, namely household consumption, government consumption, plus investment, this is what you get, pretty much the same. And it is really the the international circulation is around 40% of the economy. But what I want to show you is that China is not is continuing to open up. First of all, there was the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, that is among 15 countries, concluded last November, including ASEAN, as well as China, Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. India did not join at the last moment, but still, it actually, the whole area accounted for 30% of the world GDP. Secondly, just at the end of last year, China and the European Union, they reached agreement on the comprehensive agreement in investment. I think that is actually very positive, a sign that China is not closing up. You know, it wants to increase cooperation with other countries. They want to continue to economic globalization. China is actually one of the major beneficiaries of economic globalization. We should also see that in a meeting in December, I think of the Economic Works Conference, there is actually an indication that China actually wants to join the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. All right, I think that all these are actually very positive signals that that reform is on the way, is ongoing, and economic opening will continue. Now, unfortunately, there is a economic decoupling between China and the United States that going on various fronts. But I actually also want to emphasize that decoupling is costly in the short run, but it is just like second sourcing and just like insurance, it has benefits, okay? And you may recall that in the aftermath of earthquakes, tsunami, and so forth, most enterprises begin to think about, hey, wait a minute, we need a second source, you know, and that is basically decoupling of some sort. You need a second source. But decoupling can take two forms at least, you know, imposition of tariffs and non-tariff barriers, which has happened, and also the use of export controls. That has also happened, all right, in the decoupling between the Chinese and US economies. I think cross-border direct and portfolio investments have been coming down between the two countries, and that's for many reasons. I mean, the tougher approach of CFIUS, you know, in the United States, and now all these sanctions on Chinese firms listing in the US or American citizens and organizations purchasing Chinese shares. Okay, I think that the Chinese economy will survive all of this, but obviously these are lose-lose. Both sides lose. If you think of economic globalization as something that everyone can benefit, this deglobalization, the decoupling, actually would be lose-lose on both sides. I want to talk a little bit about access to international clearing and settlement systems. As you know, the world actually works on, and I don't think I have time to cover educational exchanges, but they're also being affected. There were 360,000 Chinese students in the US, and I don't know whether this number would be going up in the near future. It actually might be going down for a variety of reasons. But okay, we talk about the decoupling of supply chains, but I think that actually could happen. And China would survive, but at the end, it would be lose-lose. Let me just give you an example. If Google cannot sell Android system to Huawei, okay, Huawei would have to develop its own, and in the short run, that's costly and possibly disruptive. But in the long run, Google would actually lose the whole future revenue stream from Android. Okay, and Huawei is the best-selling cell phone brand in China. So I think both sides would lose, and it really doesn't stop, you know, the growth of a technology industry in China in the long run. I think instead, actually, it is really a Sputnik moment, just like 1957. You know, all of a sudden, the former Soviet Union launched a satellite into space, and America woke up and say, hey, wait a minute, we better catch up. Okay, and I think that is actually what is happening in China. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the access to international clearing and settlement systems, because basically the United States controls the use of the US dollar for clearing and settlement, because everything, even though it would go through the SWIFT system, will eventually have to go through New York. Okay, and by denying any firm or any country use of New York, they would actually effectively stop these countries from using the SWIFT system. And that's a very powerful instrument, a very powerful weapon if weaponized. Now, I want to show you the following. Before 2010, it's quite recent, 10 years ago, everything, all international transactions done by China would be settled in US dollars, everything, okay? And beginning 2010, China began to settle some of its foreign-related transactions that include mostly trade, but there would be some capital flows in Renminbi. And it reached a peak around 2015, all right, about 40%, you know, but then it dropped because of the sudden abrupt devaluation in 2015. And it took a long time before it actually just recovered back to around just below 40%, okay, recently. And I expect this will go up, okay, because because actually there are inherent advantages in settling in your own currency. I mean, you know, if you use your own currency and you trade with somebody else, there is, on either currency, there's only one single currency exchange, okay? But if you use your third country currency, like the dollar, you have to exchange from your own currency to dollar, and then the recipient would actually, the other country would have changed the dollar into its own currency. So there are basically two transaction costs, and also for the same reason, there would be two risks, two exchange rate risks, because there's always some lag between placing the order and delivery. And also, if you can use your own currency for clearing and settlement, you don't need to keep so much foreign exchange reserves. Okay, so the argument for using your own currency is clear. All right, now why is it that people don't use their own currency? And that is because the two countries, they don't trust each other's currency. Okay, let's say if I trade with you and I don't trust your currency and you don't trust my currency, we have to pick a third currency that both sides would trust. And the US dollar plays this role, okay? And in some sense, this is the seigniorage that the US gains by providing the international medium of exchange. And I think that's fair that the US can benefit from providing the seigniorage. Let us see how this works. I'm showing you a chart that actually had two columns. The blue column is the percentage of world settlement currency in November, in that 1 month, okay? The red column is the trade, the share of world trade of that country, okay? You know, and you can see the following. Both the US dollar, the first column, and the second column is the euro, Eurozone, both actually command a share in settlement slightly less than, I think, 40%, okay? 37% thereabouts, the blue column. But the red column is that the EU actually has much more international trade, world trade, than the US, all right? Now, you look at number 5. Number 5 is China. China accounted for almost 11%, almost as much as the US in terms of world trade, but in terms of world settlement, it's only about 2%, okay? Now, that says that if you're only talking about your own trade, okay, there's lots of room for the renminbi to increase its usage. Okay. Now, China's neighbor is Japan up there. You can see that Japan actually accounts for around 3.7% of world trade, and it is used in around slightly less than 3.7% of world settlement. Okay, that actually shows you there is still lots of room for the renminbi to grow. I mean, never mind about serving as a third currency for other countries. Just concentrating on settling your own trade, your own currency, would actually allow a great deal of increase. But you can also see that the seigniorage that the U.S. dollar has, that is only accounted for 11% plus 11% of world trade, but the U.S. dollar is used in the settlement of almost 40%, not quite, of world settlement. Okay. Now, next I want to do show you some long-term projections of the Chinese economy, and this is an interesting chart. On the vertical axis is the real rate of growth, okay, of GDP, okay, and on the horizontal axis is the per capita, real GDP per capita. I believe it's the 2019 prices, okay. Now, the red dots are China, the yellow dots refer to Japan, and the blue dots are the United States, okay. Now, you can see that the red dots do not extend beyond 10,000. That's because it's actually, Chinese per capita GDP is still very low. And the blue dots extend all the way over past 60, around 65,000. Japan is in the middle. But what I want to show you in this chart is the following. First, we all expect that the rate of growth will come down as per capita GDP goes up. Okay, many reasons. I don't want to explain it now. I'm sure you understand. But it's an empirical fact that the rate of growth goes down as per capita GDP goes up. All right, that's the first thing. But the second thing is to observe that China actually is at a level of per capita GDP that is still allows it to grow relatively fast. Okay, you can see that the Japan at the comparable time, yellow dots, still has a much higher growth rate. And the US also at a comparable point had also a much higher growth rate. So it is not out of the question for China. And I predict that China would actually be growing between 5 and 6% in the next decade or even 2 decades. Okay, okay. Now, then let me show you some of my projections. My projections clear here is that around 2030, okay, plus or minus a couple years, no one can be that accurate, Chinese GDP will catch up to US GDP, okay? And the assumed growth rates are down there. You can see the red columns are the assumed growth rates for China, and the blue columns are the assumed growth rates for the US, okay? Now, and that's around 2030. However, this chart is actually very interesting because it shows that even at 2030, even then, the US GDP per capita will still be more than 4 times the Chinese GDP per capita. More than 4 times. And I've done some calculation, that I think that for Chinese GDP per capita to catch up to the US GDP per capita, it will take the end of the century, okay, if ever. I won't see it, all right, but it is possible that it will never happen, okay? It will never happen because the US economy is much better endowed than the Chinese economy, okay, with arable land, water, minerals, other natural resources. So I think it might never happen. And I think the US GDP per capita will still remain the highest of all major economies for a long time. Okay, this is basically what I just said. Now, beyond economics, what can we say? Well, I think China and the US can cooperate in controlling future pandemics. My view is that COVID-19 it could be one-off, but there will be other epidemics coming in the future, okay? And we really have to get ready to prevent the next one from becoming as destructive and as disruptive as this current one, okay? Secondly, I think that China and the US working together can prevent further climate change, okay? China actually has committed to two things. One is to peak its carbon emission in 2030. That is, carbon emission will be peaked. You know, today, China is the world's largest carbon emitter, right? Accounting for 28%. So it's trying to say by 2030, the growth will be zero and will turn negative, all right, total growth of the carbon emission. And by 2060, you know, China has committed by 2060, it will be carbon neutral, meaning that net emission will be zero, okay? Now, this is, you know, the EU actually some time ago has made a commitment of becoming carbon neutral in 2050, all right? And after China made the commitment, Japan has come out to say that it will also become carbon neutral by 2050. So I think all this, if it all happens, you know, I think it would be very good. We would actually be able to achieve the limiting global warming to less than 2 degrees. Okay. And the third thing is halting further nuclear proliferation. I think this is actually very important because I think the real threat from nuclear proliferation is really not from nation states. Okay. And no nation state would want to start something like that. All right. In its right mind, would start something like that. But it's the rogue states and terrorists. And I think that is very important. Okay. Now, finally, let me say that with China's continuing participation in world economy, and given this rate of growth, I think in a matter of, you know, in the next decade, China will actually become both the largest economy as well as the largest trading nation. And, you know, but I think that China and US are complementary in many ways, economically. So they can both benefit if they will just if they just trade normally, and they will be win-win. And finally, I think if they work together, they can actually solve many problems. I already mentioned quite a few. I think one thing that actually backs reform is the World Trade Organization, the operating rules, how they would settle disputes. I think we need to change those rules because WTO has this integrated decision-making process that it requires unanimity. You cannot have unanimity among 150 nations. Try to get unanimity among 15 people in your department. It's impossible. All right. So 150, forget it. All right. So that I think that requires change. So let me just stop here. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for the very enlightening talk. So Larry, you cover many things, and I feel like you're captured at a little bit of macro level of the forecast, you know, the past and the future, etc. I kept just cannot help wondering, like, in the sense that there must be that the Chinese government has to do something to making sure this growth will continue, right? Otherwise, why do we talk about those things, right?
Yes.
So in a way that I see that there seems to be a prediction with some interest, you know, right policy direction, etc. So we were having a little bit of discussion on that. Seems like everything that I heard from the Beijing, state media, and as well as my own thinking study is on this like a reform. And what is your mind of a reform like in the past, and what do they need to do in the future, or in a way that how do you connect this reform to the statistics that you were rosy statistics that you were presenting to us today?
Well, I think one of the things you have to we have to take into account is the following, and it is the importance of the private sector, and this really means leaving the plan. And Yingyi and I and Zhiguo, we have a paper on how China abandoned the plan slowly and so forth. But basically, in 1980, let me give you an example. In 1980, urban employment was 100% government. 100%. Okay, all right. And this includes, because the whole industrial sector, urban, was owned by the government, and this includes all the government units, collective units, and so forth in the urban sector, 100%. You know what the percentage is today? A little bit about 7%. Okay, that tells you what huge changes have occurred, right? I actually tried to get some numbers on the share of GDP, but I wasn't able to get the most recent numbers. But even that number, the state-owned sector has been coming down, share of GDP. Now, if you look at the aggregate, I think it might be rising, okay? The economy is growing at 9% per year. So even if your share has been coming down, the aggregate would be going up. So I think we have to take that into account, all right? You know, Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, these are all private firms, right? I mean, they are not state-owned firms. They are not state-owned firms. So that's sort of, but I think what has really happened, if you want to focus on the reform over the last 40 years, it is really allowing the market to play a role. The market plays a very important role instead of by central planning. Now, okay, now you may argue, and I think it's with justification, that the market has not been allowed to play its full role, all right? That's why people still continue to talk about it. That's why there are so many zombie enterprises, right? So most of the zombie enterprises are state-owned, okay? But most of them are not central government-owned. You know, state-owned has many levels, okay? The central government basically controls maybe less than 150 enterprises. These are the enterprises controlled by SASAC, you know, State Asset Supervisory Administrative Commission.
What's
whatever.
that?
Okay, yeah, exactly, right. But most of the other state-owned enterprises are controlled at the provincial and local level. All right, now, okay, you ask, okay, why not let them go bankrupt? Okay, I mean, which is a sensible question, okay, these zombie enterprises. I think the answer is the following. The natural thing to do, if you have a pure market economy, they'll go bankrupt, someone will consolidate them and so forth, right? But the problem really is that it is a political issue. And the local government, no local government will want to, number one, close it up. It affects local employment. Number two, if we're going to merge, I want to be the surviving enterprise, not you, right? So decentralization doesn't really work. You actually, to handle these issues, you need to have centralization. I've argued with people all the time. I think, okay, I mean, let's say Zhiguo, you and I, we're both running two loss-making enterprises. Okay, what has to happen is that you and I should merge, right? And okay,
They don't want to.
You and I, well, we want it, but I want to be the surviving enterprise, and you want to be the surviving enterprise. So it cannot happen.
But what's interesting is that in the earlier parts of the Zhu Rongji's reform, right? Those things happened.
I know. I know. You have to understand the following, though. That is the difference between Premier Zhu's time and now is really the following, is that the local governments, they discover land. You say under Zhu Rongji, no one is allowed to touch the land. No one was allowed to touch land. But after Zhu Rongji, they discover, oh, I don't have resources. I cannot increase taxes, but I have land and I have zoning powers. Okay. So that is how they managed to find the resources. And they are not going to give that up easily. Right?
That's interesting.
Now, yeah, so I think the reform really has to come in some sense from some sort of decentralization.
But you were saying that some of the things you needed decentralization to address this question.
Exactly, very precisely. And if you really think about, let's say, carbon neutrality, that actually requires central directives.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right.
So,
no, I mean, you need a carbon tax, you need this and that and so forth. But I don't think the localities can do very much. Now, on other things, I think the local government can do a lot, and that is, okay, if we want blue skies, clear water, and clean environment, that is very much a local thing. The central. I want to share a joke with you. I said, if you really want to improve the quality of drinking water at the local level, what you really should do is every time you go down to a locality, have the local party secretary drink the tap water directly. That will make sure that he will have every incentive to clean up the water. No, I mean,
of course. Yeah. Right.
That will focus their attention, right?
Yeah.
So anyhow, it's complicated. I mean, even though people like to think of China as an authoritarian government, which it is, but it is also, it's not true that the government can move everything.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. It's just government are faced by market discipline in a way that some. So great, thank you. So let me just ask another question, which is also showing up in the Q&A part, and then open to other the more freestyle questions. So this is let me read. This is also my question. So many example, Acemoglu, argue that good institutions are vital to economic growth. Well, that China in a way is in a way they're providing, I wouldn't say counter, but I would say fresh perspective to this question, right? How do you think about it? How do you is this it's just a different direction, but get to the exactly same conclusion, or?
Now, I want to make a couple of points. First of all, I think fighting COVID is like fighting a war. Okay, I mean, you recognize that fighting COVID is like fighting a war. Mm-hmm. And when you have fighting a war, you need a centralized government.
Yes, clear.
Right? You cannot have a divided government. You cannot have, and that is what's happening in the US. Right? You need a centralized government. You need a centralized approach. All right. So I think that now, when you're not fighting a war, I would not insist on that. I would not insist on. It's very different. Okay. And I think that you have to say that for the Chinese government, it is very much a war. Okay. And because if you think you are going to close down Hubei on the eve of Chinese New Year's Eve, when everybody, all families are supposed to get together, do you think how popular it would be? It's just sort of like before Thanksgiving, no travel. No one is allowed to travel. You know, it's not going to be that popular. Right?
Yeah, I was here. Like all this
No.
media is just really bashing you.
Yeah, no, it's not going to come. But I think if you really look at the results, that has accomplished the result is not letting what happened in Hubei spread to the rest of the country. Right? If the COVID virus, were allowed to spread to the rest of the country, China today would be like Europe, would be like the US. It's hopeless, right? Because you have to, because the gestation period is so long, could be so long, could be 28 days. So I can, even if I'm infected, I can go around for up to 28 days without having any symptoms, right? And in the meantime, how many people will I see in 28 days? I don't know, but it will be thousands. And those thousands will see another 1,000. Right? So I think that is really my first point, is that it is like a war. All right. Now I think you are right about the that governance is important, institutions important, and I won't deny that there are governance problems in China. If you actually look at the first 5 years, when you had the anti-corruption campaign, you see the large number of people being purged. You know that there's a problem. There was a problem. Okay, and I think that I think we have to thank Wang Qishan for doing all this, right? But I don't think it's been completely eliminated. It's a continuing thing, right? And it just have to continue to be vigilant. Now, but I want to add one thing though. The interesting thing about China is the ability to alleviate and to eliminate poverty. All right, and I think by the end of last year, supposedly there are no one under the poverty line now.
Yeah, poverty
line. Yeah, but you know how it was accomplished? Every state-owned enterprise has a responsibility. Okay, they are given one county, and if they are better off, 2 or 3, 4 counties, they say, okay, it's your responsibility to make sure that the people in this county are lifted out of poverty. Right? I mean, all the SOEs have special duties.
Objective.
No, but it's their duties. They have to do that. I mean, in addition, their duty is not maximize profits. You have to lift these people out of poverty, right? And I think the enterprises take that serious.
Yes.
Right. So I think it is a different kind of governance, but I have actually one thing that I've been urging for a long time, which hasn't happened. I think the problem with corporate governance in China, let's say even the non-state-owned enterprises, is the following, is that shareholders hold their shares for too short a period. Right. I mean, the average holding period on Shanghai is about 20 days. I understand. This is a survey a couple of years ago. I don't think
than I thought.
I don't think it's improved quite anyway. But think about it. If you only hold it for 20 days, or more or less, do you care how the enterprise is managed? You might not even know what the enterprise does, and never mind about ESG, right? Okay, so I think that needs to be changed. What I have been urging for a long time is that require cash dividends. Okay, require payment of cash dividends. so that people would have an incentive to hold long term.
I see.
Right? And only long-term shareholders have any interest in governance. Right? And it's hopeless to think that you can improve governance if most people just buy and sell within 20 days. It's really not possible. Right. So I mean, I'm very honest here. I'm saying that
sure.
it's work in progress. And so anyhow.
Yeah, great. So there are a bunch of questions flowing in. Let me just, let's see. Let's say something that I think most of I believe the audience, Larry, the audience seems to be more US based. So,
yes.
this platform is really try to kind of like tell you in my mind, the true side or balance the side of China's perspective, right? So one question is about unfair trade practice that are accused by Donald Trump, like the IP protection, those things. What's your view?
Well, I think I would begin by saying that I'm all for IP protection. Actually, back in 2014, a group of people and we actually did a study on China-US economic relations, and we recommended two things. One is that China should set up a special IP court, okay, in 2014. And secondly, that we should have much easier.
But wait, so in 2014, you did a study?
Yeah, and it did set up a special IP court because the average judge knows nothing, right?
Yeah.
Right, okay. The average judge is hopeless. So they have a special IP court to look at these things. And I believe that some US plaintiffs actually have won, significant judgments. Okay, all right. Now, it's a piece of work, again, work in progress. But I want to say that China today awards the largest number of patents in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, and what that tells you is that there is a constituency in China that would press for enforcement of IP.
Which is true, yes.
Right, and if you look back to Taiwan in the 60s and 70s, Taiwan is known as the intellectual theft capital of the world.
When was it? I didn't know.
Yeah, in the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
Yeah. And I still remember Paul Samuelson complaining to me bitterly that his book was being pirated and sold for about, I don't know, about I think $1 or $2 in Taiwan. They were complaining bitterly. Well, his book is very good, I must say. But anyway, that is stopped completely. So there is a process. And even if you look at Japan in the 50s, and very few people know this, but there is a city in Japan, renamed itself USA, USA. So they can say made in USA, made in USA. So I think this is really a process, all right? And okay, I mean, I can't defend it, but it happens everywhere. But I want to say that it's now on track. Okay, there is a legal process, and what people should do is to use the courts.
Oh yeah. But then you need to develop the courts in an effective way. So often the time I just tell my students, it's just that there's a lot of a chicken egg thing that you need some spike. So that the things setting up, but then the other things you have to set up, and then just whole thing.
Yeah. No, but I think if you actually look at what happened in 2014,
okay,
it was a huge improvement. Okay,
I see. So that's the 2014. Okay, good. There are some some people also like, let me talk a little bit, still internal, this debt problem. You mentioned the land, obviously, immediately once you mention land, local government, immediately you get to the question of these debt problems. And you also mentioned the zombie. So it's all the same. All I'm trying to ask you is that what, like, future, next decade? Can you tell us a little bit about next decade?
Well, I think I don't think you can solve all the problems. All right. Okay. But the debt problem in China is actually, I think, is compared to other countries, is relatively benign. Okay. Let me explain why. Central government debt is about 20% of Chinese GDP, 20. Okay. Mm-hmm. If you say, okay, let's add in the local government debt.
Yeah.
All right. That will add another 20%. Yeah. So the total, let's assume that the central government assumes all the local government debt. All right. Which I don't think is advisable. But anyway, if it does, for political and reasons, it would be 40% of GDP. Now, do you know what the Japanese debt to GDP ratio is?
Debt to GDP. Oh, yeah. That's really high. Public debt. That should be very high, right?
250%.
Okay, yeah.
And rising. Okay.
Right. Rising. And then they're largely owned by themselves, right? It's like self-financing.
Yeah, well, that is also true of Chinese debt. I'll come back to Japanese debt later. But you know what is the U.S. debt to GDP ratio? Public debt, central government debt, is exceeding 100% of GDP. Okay, so if you look at it in that context, it is not a serious problem that China cannot handle. Okay, it is that problem. But let me go back to explain what you just said, which I explain to people all the time. You look at Japanese debt, okay, you get scared, 250%. What am I going to do? Now, think of that as intrafamily debt. Okay, now the son borrows from the father. The father wants repayment, all right, which is reasonable. And the son would go to the mother, and the mother would ask the father for money, and so the circle would be completed.
I see. Okay.
Right? So as long as it's intra-family, and that is basically how you would characterize Japanese debt, because it's all issue. Number one, it's all issue in yen, which it can print. All issue in yen. And secondly, it's all owed to Japanese nationals. There are very few outside holders of Japanese debt. Very, very few. I would say probably less than 1%, right? So as long as interest rate is very low, which it is, you can play this game forever, right? So you have nothing to worry about. And I think the U.S. to a certain extent can also play this game almost forever. I mean, there are more outside holders of U.S. debt, but U.S. debt is all in dollars, which it can also print, right? Oh, you want me to repay? Sure, here it is, and you print some more. So it's not a problem. Okay, so I would say that that it is in some sense a problem, but it's not a problem that cannot be effectively handled.
It's good. So I would like to, I think this is an important thing that I think some bunch of questions gets to this point. It's on your touching on the point of a private sector. I'm as a researcher, actually, there's a lot of media talk saying, oh, it's a state retreat. What is it called? A state advance private retreats, 国进民退, right? I try to get the data. It's not clear at all. You always can cut the data to show one picture that kind of thing. But let's just take that, take the kind of like the government position seems to be that this is we want our state-owned sector stronger. That's very clear from their perspective. Whether it's bigger, I'm not sure, but the stronger, that's clearly sure. And that seems like a lot of times leads to the private sector shrink in some certain senses. I would like you to know whether you did some other kind of research on saying, is this true? First of all, is this true? Second, that if it's true, what's your think?
Well, I think we have to start from the premise that if you are the manager or the CEO of a state-owned enterprises, you want to get bigger.
Yes.
Okay, every CEO wants to get bigger. All right. So
empire
you start
building.
Start from that premise, right? I mean, okay. Now, I think what you have to remember though is that the private enterprises are also very large, very big, like Alibaba, right? And they are possibly already too big, and the government is finally waking up to the fact that they are too big. They have to apply anti-monopoly law and antitrust law to these enterprises, just like in the U.S. We're waking up to the fact that, come on.
It's the same.
Right?
It's the same.
Yeah, same. Facebook is too big. And I think that is very important. And I think that the Ant Financial got in trouble because they are skirting laws on lending. All right. So anyhow, so I think it's not the case. Like if you look at the financial sector, it is not the case that 过进民退, right? That is really not the case. And in fact, they are fighting a rearguard action, right, to make sure that the laws are complied with, right? So I think there is more than that meets the eye. But let me tell you, give you one example, which I actually find very encouraging. You know that in a couple months ago, a new company is formed called, I think it's called the China Pipe or something like that. That is, they take pipe. They take all the pipelines of the oil companies and form a public company. Right.
Yeah. I see.
And that is a natural monopoly, no question about it. But it would be open to everybody. It's sort of like a national grid. All right. And the advantage of that is that it opens up, because I can go to Sichuan to explore shale gas, right? And then I could just go on that pipe network, just like everybody else. Before that, I cannot do it. You know, the three big oil companies, they say, who are you? Of course, I won't let you use my pipeline. Or they will put me a very high price. So that is actually very positive. Now, you can say that there's 过进, you know, because you have a national pipeline.
I share so much view with you. You know the China Tower company? It's the same idea.
Same idea. I think that's great because it eliminates duplicative infrastructure. But what is more important, that promotes competition.
Yes,
I share with you. It promotes competition. So I think we need to think really in those terms, right? And okay, it's okay to have a natural monopoly, right? Provided it is properly supervised, regulated, and not allowed to charge monopoly rents, right? But it's actually very positive.
Okay, so let me just finish with two questions. One is that how do you think about the future of China-US? And the second question is, I just put it here, is that if you can give President Xi some advice, let's say 2 or 3, what do you want to give?
You know,
so first is the US-China, then is like a advice to.
I think the China-U.S. relations will be competitive in the next decade. That's the new normal. Okay, there's economic competition, there's technological competition, there is geopolitical competition. Okay, I think it's not going to overnight to change. I think in the U.S., the idea that China should be contained for various reasons is actually shared by both parties, right? I mean, think about pivot to Asia and the TPP, original TPP.
Yeah,
they were President Obama's initiatives, right? And I don't understand why Trump decided to scrap them all, right? Okay, but I think that's the case. But I basically think that the China actually does not pose an existential threat to the U.S.
Does
not. China doesn't want to change the U.S. If you listen to what the Chinese leaders say, they always say that we have a socialist market system with Chinese characteristics, which means that it's not good. It's not good for you. It won't work for you, right? I mean, that's always what they say. It's always with Chinese characteristics.
Sure.
Unlike the Soviet Union, Khrushchev said, "We'll bury you," right? Okay. The struggle between the U.S., the former Soviet Union, and the U.S. is really existential, right? But certainly from the Chinese side, it's not existential. Okay, right. So, so I think eventually the U.S. would have to learn to live with China, live with a peaceful China. Now, let me actually add one more insight. That's very important. If you look at China, look at China's history. China has never had to deal with a friendly country as an equal. When China was very strong, all the other countries, Japan and so forth, they are vassal states, right? Okay. When China was very weak, oh my God, all the foreign countries were masters, right? China has never dealt with another friendly country as an equal.
Interesting.
Right? So it has to learn. But on the other hand, neither has the US. You look at Europe, to the UK, they said, we save you 2 or 3 times. To France, we save you two times at least, right? To Germany, we occupy you, right? To Japan, we defeated and occupy you. So which country does the US regard as equal? There was only one, but it's not friendly. The former Soviet Union. I think the US treated the former Soviet Union as an equal adversary, but it's an adversary, not a friend. So both sides have to learn how to treat someone, a friendly country, as an equal. That takes time, okay? But like I said, I mean, this is, this is what I thought.
Yeah. Okay. So before we finish, 2 advices to Xi, if you may.
Now, I think the most important thing for Xi internationally is to support the international economic order. Okay, China has been a beneficiary, major beneficiary of economic globalization. We should promote a rule-based international economic order going forward. Okay, a reform of the WTO, China should support. Okay, because I think this economic globalization has brought great benefits and prosperities in China. It will bring great prosperity to India and then to Africa. We have to open it up so they have their chance, their opportunities. All right. So I think a continuing opening is the right thing to do. The other thing is the continuing relying on the market. And that really means doing things like the pipe network, but also enforcing antitrust laws. You know, I have one thing that I worry is the following, is that once someone like Alibaba or Amazon has so much information, you know what they can do? They can price discriminate perfectly, right? So I go on Amazon and I want to buy something. Let's say you go on Amazon and they say, okay, Zhiguo, you shop at LVMH, you shop at Chanel, we should quote you a high price, right? And Larry, you shop at Costco, we will quote you a low price. They could perfectly price discriminate. And what does that mean? That means the market is nothing, right? Because they would tax away all our consumer surplus, all of our consumer surplus, right? So we really should regulate this. Otherwise, we all become slaves for these.
Yes, so it seems like you're very much supportive of the recent regulation of fintech.
Yeah.
So yes, good. I mean, great. Thank you so much, Larry. It's such a great start and a lot of deep points that I learned quite a bit. And there are a lot of questions, Q&As. You know, I can't cover everything, but some of them are really, I feel like very deep points. I was trying to contact Gloria. I saw that she was typing a lot of other things, and just, you know, if you have more questions, you feel like it's not answered, sending email to me, I will forward it to Larry, or you know, I can provide it and just having some email chain to keep the discussion. So thank you so much. Thank you.